In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. This man came for a witness, to bear witness of the light, that all through him might believe. He was not that light, but was sent to bear witness of that light. That was the true light which gives light to every man coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, and the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own did not receive him. But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, to those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. May God add his blessing to the reading of his word. You may be seated. When we look at this passage of Scripture, there are some things we need to just know from the beginning. The Apostle John was the youngest of the apostles, and he was with Jesus in many situations. And you had the 12 that were always with Jesus when he was doing his public stuff, but very often Jesus would single out 3 apostles to be with him. Anybody tell me those 3 names? Peter, James, and John. Those are the ones. Peter, James, and John. Peter, James, and John. And James was the brother of John, the first of the apostles to be martyred. And then John was the last apostle to be martyred. So there's a big significant difference there. John wrote this, and by the time he had written it, he was obviously thinking in terms of more like theology and philosophy. Whereas the other Gospels were written to just tell us the events that took place and help us to understand what that was all about. The Apostle John set up his thing more like an essay or a treatise. And he has it divided into sections. There are 7 I am statements, 7 miracles, there are 7 things, and he goes into that whole thing to show the nature and the personhood of Jesus Christ. He starts off by this rather interesting thing, in the beginning. And when you think of those words, there's another place where those show up. And that would be in Genesis 1:1, where it says, in the beginning God created. But here, it's just a little bit different. It says, in the beginning was the Word. Now, it doesn't mean that the Word started in the beginning. It means really before the beginning of everything. He said, in the beginning was the Word, and the word for word is logos, which has the idea not just of a word which has pronunciation and that kind of thing, but it is more of an idea, of a concept, and you have the word logical, that comes from that word. You have logistics, there are all kinds of things. And it means it has an idea, it has thought and process. So, where a parrot can make a sound that sounds like an English word or whatever other language they've learned, there's no thought going in there. The parrot isn't going to be able to think of synonyms or antonyms or anything like that. The parrot just has that. When your dog comes when you call it, time to eat or something like that, it doesn't have any ability to think beyond that. But this whole idea of intelligence is there. There's an intelligence going on that can be communicated. And that's what a word is. It is taking an intelligent thought and being able to communicate it to someone else. And so this is the idea that in the beginning was the Word. Now we know that the Word was none other than Jesus Christ. But it says, in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. The idea of being with is not just meaning alongside of, but it means kind of connected. So that, and we understand this kind of thing. You can be in a group of people, and somebody might say something, and I can say, oh, I'm with her, and I can point to my wife, who's further away from me than the person right beside me. If there was some other woman right beside me, and I said, well, I'm with her, like, what? The idea of with, not just being positional, but being connected. And John is trying to make this very clear. And then it says the Word was God. The Greek language is different than the English language, and they don't use the indefinite article. What does that mean? They don't use a and am. They use a definite article, but not the indefinite. And so, I can remember many years ago, some Jehovah's Witnesses came to my door, and they were trying to argue that Jesus was not equal with God. He was a God, lowercase. And they even told me that in the Greek it was lowercase, which, well, of course, because everything in Greek is in lowercase. And they tried to persuade me. I said, really? I said, well, I don't think you understand that. And they said, well, we'll bring somebody back who understands Greek. Because I said, the Greek says, NRK hein hologos, kai hologos proston theon, kai theon hein hologos. I said, what? I said, so that's what it says. Let's talk about it. And what the Greek literally does is say, we would say the Word was God, but by putting the word God first in the Greek, it says God, theos, deity, was the Word. It emphasizes his deity, not detracting from it. They twist it and put it up on its head. What the Apostle John is telling people right at the beginning is that this person that he describes in his position as the Word, that we will later on understand as Jesus Christ, that he is fully God. I want to skip all the way to the end of that passage. The apostle says, we beheld his glory. The glory as of the only begotten Son of the Father, full of grace and truth. When you ask about we, who is the we he's talking about? Sometimes people like to use the rural we, they're just there by themselves. We've decided, what, do you have a mouse in your pocket? But that's not what he's doing. When he says we, he's not referring to everybody seeing it. Everybody didn't see it. The mass of people looked on Jesus and all they saw was a man. But Peter, James, and John saw something, didn't they? On the Mount of Transfiguration, they saw his glory in a way that no one else has ever seen, before or since. They saw him transfigured, transformed before their eyes, and then they saw Moses and Elijah talking with him, that's going to be a big thing. They saw that. But they not only saw that, they saw all the things that he did. And Jesus said, the things he did by the finger of God. But John is saying, look, we've seen this. In his letter, John says, that which we have touched, we've handled, we've heard concerning him. We've touched him. We know him. Remember that after his resurrection, Thomas wasn't with the others when Jesus first appeared to the apostles. And when they told him that we've seen Jesus, he said, no. Unless I can touch his side and his wounds, I'm not going to believe. And Jesus said, look, a spirit doesn't have flesh and bones as I see that you have. This is a real person. You see, the ancient Greeks also had this idea of logos, and they wanted to believe that the being that walked on the earth was not really human. Just looked like a human, an apparition. They had this whole idea because they just couldn't conceive of somebody actually having a human body with all the functions that the human body has to deal with, and dysfunctions and whatever. So the Apostle John is trying to convey these things to us. And then he makes a statement about Jesus, which is very important. He says, all things were made by him, and without him, there was nothing made that was made. That means that everything that we can see, and even things we can't see, were made by Jesus. There is nothing in existence other than God himself that was not created by Jesus Christ. And we learn this, that all things were made for his pleasure. And so we need to understand, if he made everything that's for his pleasure, we ought to find out what pleases him. In him was life, it says. And so we have this divergence of opinion. We live in a world today with a large number of people, in fact, probably most of the younger generation, believes that matter created life. We believe that life created matter. That somehow they believe that all kinds of elementary particles that they don't know how they even got here suddenly got organized well enough to create life and then intelligence. And we believe, no, there was an intelligence that knew how to create matter and cause it to form biological life. It also says, in him was life, and the life was the light of men. Now, the problem that we have is that we live in a scientific age and we think of light as photons and electromagnetic things, and they didn't think that way at all. Both the ancient Hebrews and the ancient Greeks had a picture of light. Light is that which reveals. Light is that which is exuded by something which has glory. And so in the picture of the ancient Hebrews, the light indicated the very presence of God. That's why he showed us a light in the pillar of fire. He always had the lights going. It was very important. He showed himself in terms of light. In the Greek thinking, light was that which caused us to have understanding. You can't understand without light. It says that the light shone in the darkness. Now that doesn't necessarily mean physical light shining in the great cosmos of darkness, but it means the darkness which is in the human heart of man, which is a very deep darkness. It says, the light shone in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. What does that mean? Jesus was out there showing who the Father was, and people just looked and said, we have no idea what's going on here. You can turn on a light, and a blind man might feel the heat, but he won't see it. You can have a wonderful light display, and it'll be something which totally passes them by. And people are blinded by their sinful human condition. Jesus was in the world. He was perfect. He was doing exactly what his Father indicated he wanted him to do. He made everything. He comes in, he starts explaining the things of God to him, and it goes right over their head. I think about this. I sometimes like to tease small animals. So Amy's dog will come along and be wanting something. I can't figure what the dumb dog wants. And I'll say, Jenna, use your words. Which is what you tell small children to do so they don't whine and fuss. You tell them, use your words. So I do that to the dog. The dog goes, I have to figure it out. But in a lot of ways, when God tries to communicate eternal truth to us, it's like the same dissonance. We seem incapable of comprehending. That's why he sent his Son, made under the law, made like a human being, so that he could communicate with us, because apart from that, there's no intersection. And the difference between God becoming man, and they call it the holy condescension, he condescended to become a man. The difference between him becoming human so he could communicate with us is a greater, much greater chasm than if I allowed myself to become a dog to communicate with Jenna. What's the name of that? I forget the shaggy dog. Remember that? You know? Be worse than that. We have no understanding of the depth of condescension that he took upon himself. Now, it says that the darkness did not comprehend it. Then it comes to another. It says he came unto his own. When it says that, we might not like this thought, but it truly does mean that Jesus came to the Jewish people. That's who he was. He was a Jew. And he came to the Jewish people. Why? Because he'd been promised to the Jewish people through Abraham. He'd been promised his kingly line through David. He'd been promised again and again that he would come of the Jewish people. Moses had predicted him, as well as many other prophets. He came to his own. In fact, there was one time when there was a Gentile that was seeking his own. He said, I am come but to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. That's who I'm coming to. He opened up the door wide, but that's who he came to first. And it says, his own did not receive him. They didn't like it. You know, there is that whole thing that Jesus articulated that is very true. He said a prophet is not without honor except in his hometown among his friends and family. You know, people do real well, and those who are close by and see their various faults have a hard time accepting who they are. But Jesus had no faults. And they still had a hard time accepting him because they saw him grow up. They didn't see him cause any difficulties, but it's somehow the ones that you see grow up. You know, I look at this and I understand this. I look at my grandchildren, I still think of them as children. But they're doing things now that are way past whatever I could think of, and it's hard to wrap your head around that. His own did not receive him. The picture of receiving somebody is not just hospitality. It doesn't mean they didn't extend him hospitality. You know, we receive guests. That's hospitality. Receiving something there means accepting and responding to their place. So we sing that Christmas carol, let earth receive her king. When somebody receives the king, it means they are putting themselves under them in terms of their authority. The Jewish people refused. But it does say, but as many as received him. As many as received him, put themselves under his authority, put themselves under his plans. He has the right of life and death over us. He has a right to tell us everything we ought to think and do. All those who put themselves under his authority, it says to them, he gave the authority to become children of God. It means that having done that, just receiving him as king doesn't mean that we should expect anything else. Why? Because he is king. We ought to just accept that. But in accepting that, he then says, since you've done that, I'm going to give you a right. You see, a king, we live in a democracy, so we just don't understand these things anymore. A king decides who gets what privileges and rights, and can extend to anyone whatever right he chooses. He extends to us the right, it says, to become children of God. Now, in a very large sense, all human beings are children of God because we're children of Adam, who was the Son of God. It said, why? Because God made him directly. So in one sense, we're all children of God, and people who make that statement, they have a basis for doing it, but generally they misuse it, because the reality is a lot of people are children of wrath. Jesus even said to the Pharisees that they were children of their father, the devil, and we don't like that, meaning that they're deceivers. Satan is a deceiver, and people who practice deceit, they're doing what their father does, the father of lies. Do we live in a world where people practice deceit? I think so. And that talks about we are born. People in the world today mock the words of being born again. That's not just some crazy thought that people came up with. Jesus said it. And John is saying that there's a birth that takes place. It takes place in our heart and our spirit when God does something for us. We don't choose to be born again. We receive him, and he chooses to give birth to us by the washing of regeneration and renewal of the Holy Spirit. That's what we're told. He says, no man willed it. It didn't come about by the human biological process, but the will of the flesh. It happened because it was God who does it. And this whole picture that God is doing all these things, God, Jesus Christ, made everything. He's coming into the world. He introduces this character, John, in this passage as well. Not himself, but John the Baptist. And the reason he did that, he's still writing to a Jewish audience. And you see, the Jewish people had acknowledged John to be a great prophet. You ought to listen to him. And John is the one who said, that's the Messiah. He's the one that turned to the crowd when Jesus came to be baptized and said, behold the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world. He's the one who sent his disciples to go follow after Jesus. And so John is making this pitch for us to understand who Jesus is. At this time of Advent, when people are making merry and completely forgetting that the reason for the merriment is that God the Son took upon human flesh so that he could save his people. That all we have to do is receive him. People reject Jesus. I just read about some school district that said you can't have any Christmas carols that mention Jesus. Well, what are we singing? Xmas carols now? Donna and I are watching the Rockefeller tree lighting. Every Christmas song they sang had nothing to do with Jesus except twice. There were people who sang it and they mangled it so bad you'd hardly know what the Christmas carol was. I said, I can't take it anymore. Turn it off, turn it off. I love the fact that the little group that I was in singing last night down on Market Street, that we sang Christmas carols and Christmas songs, and people came in, we even had little booklets to give out to that help. People actually still like to hear Christmas carols. It's a wonderful thing. But Jesus took on human flesh, not just so he could communicate with us, which he did. Not just so he could reveal the Father, which he did. Remember, he told Philip, he who has seen me has seen the Father. No, he came to die for us. And we live in a world where people don't like to think in those categories, but it was needed. He had to die for us. If there was any other way that would have accomplished all that he wanted to accomplish, I'm sure he would have done it. But he laid down his life for us, that we might have life in eternity with him. And that's something that no human heart and mind can truly comprehend. We can only approach it. We can only mull it over in our brain. We can only think about it, but someday we will enjoy it, but we will never understand it fully until we meet with God himself in his heaven. And for that we're glad. I'm also glad that, in remembering him, we don't just have Christmas carols, which are good, but he's also given to us the Lord's table to remember him by.